Hi, and welcome back to 2026 with the Koru News Roundup. And nice to see you, Katie. How are you?
Nice to see you, Chris. Yeah, all good, refreshed. I'm ready and raring to go. 2026
Excellent.
is shaping up to be a good start of the year. Yeah.
Great stuff. Well, raring to go. I think we've already got our first article up on screen. And this was one of your suggestions, wasn't it? That you sent through for us to have a look at, and it's all about internal exclusion, reset or rejection. And I kind of wonder about the international listeners that we have, and whether they face this problem as regularly as perhaps UK teachers in a domestic setting might face the same problem. But tell us what your thoughts are. Where are you?
I thought this was really interesting, mainly because it's something that hasn't popped up before, and it kind of came to my attention that it's not something that's tracked or hasn't been tracked, or there's not very much data out there about how often this has been used. And yet it is definitely something that I've seen in school, I've seen in primary and in secondary settings. In fact, when I was at school, like being sent to internal exclusion was a thing, and so it struck me as interesting.
Are you still traumatized by that very journey yourself?
Fortunately, because I was, of course, a very good student, I was never sent to internal exclusion. But I do have vivid memories of classmates being sent when they had got to the point where they were just disturbing everybody else's learning. And as much as we, as teenagers, sort of quite happily continued with the chaos that was ensuing in class, it did do what some of the pros of internal exclusion can do. It did minimize the disruption to our learning in that moment, because that student wasn't ready to learn and was actively stopping us.
I think it's probably worth addressing that idea of what internal exclusion is and why it's used. And I think that perhaps there is a little bit of disparity on that across different places. As you'd expect, different schools will have different approaches to it. My understanding of internal exclusion, and when I've seen it in operation, either as a youngster myself, I never went to exclusion either, by the way, or as a teacher in the early years of my career. There's that idea that you remove a child from the class because they're being unduly disruptive, and then they go somewhere else. And actually, as a teacher at that point, where they go and what they do ceases to be your concern almost. That then becomes the remit of a third party, the deputy head, assistant head, or an inclusion supervisor. And it's a very interesting scenario. Is it something that we should be doing at all? I think it's quite often used very poorly in schools for the person that's excluded.
Yes.
I think that it's very easy for them to not make amends, not get any improvement. In fact, quite the opposite. They often get labeled as a troublemaker, a disruptive person, whatever. But then I think about the dilemma that a teacher faces. You only have so much bandwidth as a teacher. How do you deal with that scenario? At what point do you say, actually, enough's enough? I can't continue the lesson with this child behaving as they are. And perhaps that's their objective. Perhaps that's bringing that attention to them. And at what point do you protect the rights and the safety and the comfort and the well-being of the rest of the class, recognizing that you prejudice the rights of that individual or that small cohort in your class?
Well, I think that's really it. I think if it's set up and used poorly, if it's not part of a solid pastoral care, connection over correction kind of ethos, if you are literally saying, I do not have the capacity to deal with this student, and there's no repair afterwards, there is literally just going away. That is exactly what this article is talking about, the idea of, you know, being rejection. It is not it's not a reboot. It's not a system reboot. It's not a this isn't acceptable right now, but we will reconnect and work to improve your readiness or your need, you know, afterwards. Because there is this idea that, you know, there is a root cause for behavior. All behavior is, you know, it's communication of some sort. So if there is an unmet need, if there is a difficulty, you know, something that's happening that's causing this behavior, and you don't meet it, you just push it away to another classroom, to somebody else's responsibility, then you end up with, you know, the situation where this cycle will just repeat, and there will be no connection between you and the student.
I also worry with this that by removing the child, by sort of suppressing it, you're effectively storing up bigger problems for later on. And I look at this, and I look at the propensity for disruption, and it's something that is quite severe in the UK. In Newcastle, recently there's been strikes at a particular school because of behavior, because they've been unable to get on top of behavior. So the teachers have gone on strike. They feel threatened, they feel uncomfortable, it's affecting their well-being and all of those kind of things. And I just wonder if maybe our whole sort of model of what we're trying to do in classrooms and how we're supposed to do it is maybe creating part of the problem rather than maybe addressing it. And there's that idea that the teachers are in the UK particularly have quite a narrow brief as to what they can and can't do, how they've got to do it. There's almost a sense that they're no longer professionals, but they're technicians, because that brief is so tight. And perhaps when you create those really tight parameters, that makes it really hard for them to adapt to the individual learners in front of them, give that child the space, the room to kind of do what works for them. And I just sort of wonder if maybe there's a systemic problem underneath all of this that maybe not obviously linked, but perhaps feeds into the fact that we're struggling with behavior in this context.
Well, I think that's really interesting. I think looking at the graph that you've got up in front of you on the screen is really interesting. The fact that there is such a huge gap between how much this is used in primary and how much this is used in secondary. And we know kind of developmentally, we're at very different stages. You know, middle school teachers are, in my eyes, quite a special brand of human, because teenagers are often quite tricky because of the way that their world is developing, their brain is developing, what they're interested in, how to engage, how to motivate, how to draw teenagers in is historically very interesting. I mean, Montessori said they should all go and work on a farm for 4 years because they were fit for nothing in the classroom, and I don't disagree. I feel there is
just to be clear, listeners, other opinions are available.
Yes, and there is this idea of, you know, teenagers developing their idea of identity and a very social kind of learning. And I feel like when you are then using isolation as a punishment, that developmentally sits funny in my chest, in my stomach. It doesn't feel quite right. I don't know.
There was something that I saw in a school as well once, that when kids went to isolation, the isolation was quite a calm environment without any major pressure on that child to try and bring the tempo down, and that was a fair objective. One of the things that they did was that they built and played with remote control cars in that environment. So when a kid wasn't really in the mood for lessons or doing any work or what have you, they just kicked up a stink for 15 minutes and off they went and played with remote control cars. There was a kind of reward cycle involved with that, that for a certain group of pupils within that school was dead easy. And you know, and one of them admitted that they actively played up so that they could go and engage with the more fun agenda down the road, rather than down the corridor, rather than the agenda that was on in classroom of getting stuff done. I don't necessarily know the solution to this, but I do think that there's probably a systemic issue, whether it's class sizes, could well be a funding issue with that. It's much easier to deal with stuff in a smaller class because you've got improved bandwidth for each child. Maybe a little less anxiety. Perhaps that workload thing also feeds into it. You know, if you've got a lot of workload on and you're tense and you're up here, then that resilience that you have as a teacher to observe, judge, and make the right call is also a little bit degraded. And then we've got the model of actually asking people to sit down, be quiet, and do some work in the classroom, which we still have in our classrooms today.
Yeah, I can
just
see it.
wonder how flawed that is as a concept.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting for sure. And speaking to the the student who chose to go out and play with the remote control cars, I feel like that's part of the conversation too. Like that should have been the teacher who had sent him should have had that conversation, that repair, and been like, well, but why? And got to kind of the crux of that issue, because so often it's not actually the subject matter that students dislike. It's either the way that it's kind of presented, or often it is just teacher rapport that makes a huge difference. No, sure. I thought this was interesting.
And that's hard to have that rapport, if you're under pressure, feeling threatened, blah blah blah.
Sure. And I don't want to blame teachers. That is not what this is about. This is not a teacher blame situation. This was just that's interesting.
I also think back to the school that we worked in, where we were very privileged because we just had a fairly peachy kind of environment with the kids and the parents and stuff like that for the most part. Where we didn't face this kind of challenge. So yeah, it is an interesting one. Okay, time ticking by very, very quickly. The next one is a story about AI. Now, I'm going to piggyback on the back of a recent keynote I did in Vietnam with the Fabricia Teacher Community Conference, where we looked at AI and the sort of the future of education, whether it was fit for purpose or not. Do you use AI, Kaylee?
Oh,
bear in mind you're on the record.
I'm on the record at this point. Okay, yes, I do. For time to time, not every day, not for most of my work, I have to say. And I do feel like I'm one of those teachers that is kind of was being overtaken by their students. Often my students will say, oh Kaylee, she only uses ChatGPT, and I'm like, oh yes, and and they're like, no, like, you're such a millennial. 100% I am groping about in the darkness of AI.
Get with the program, old lady.
Exactly. I'm feeling older and older about it, and I do feel like there is a difference in the way that my brain will start to solve a problem by itself before automatically going to AI, which is what a lot of my students will do. If they don't know the answer, there's this immediate recognition of, I don't know, but I know something that does. And they will switch. It's interesting.
There's a book, and I made the mistake of reading it on the plane on the way to Vietnam. And it's called Brave New Worlds by Salman Khan, the Khan Academy chap. And it's about AI and the evolution of AI and how it's feeding into education. And I had my keynote, etc., all done before I got on the plane. And then I read the book. That was a mistake. I had a very frenzied afternoon on arrival in Vietnam, adapting and changing my keynote slides and ideas. And I really liked what he had to say. The question here, off-call chief reveals anxiety about AI use in exam coursework. I think that's a fair anxiety. There's no doubt about it. I think it goes way beyond exam coursework. I've been reading some economics essays recently, and it's by one girl. She's written it by hand, so she's not copied and pasted it, but it's definitely written by AI. She denies it totally. And I can tell that it's written by AI because of the structure and the way it's written. But as you get further on, they get better at being in your style and all of that kind of stuff. And it is rather But here's the thing for me. Does that matter? And I'm not sure. Ooh, I can feel the heckles. Let me extend that question a little further first. I think it matters to us, grey hair, older generation, Grandma Kaylee. But I don't think it matters to the youngsters that we're teaching. And we've then got to fundamentally ask, well, whose needs are we here to meet? Are we trying to meet our own? Are we trying to meet the needs of the children in front of us? And I think that if we're using AI as teachers from time to time, which is fine, we kind of can't not expect children to use it. And actually, I think we can go a step further. I think we can embrace that creativity of youngsters with AI and perhaps even go as far as going on the journey with them. You talk about being nervous about not being the subject expert. I think we could take the nerves out of the question and go into it and say, well, okay, none of us are the expert on this because it's an evolving field. So let's travel that path together and let's learn together. And that would allow the teachers, yourself, etc., to put those guardrails up to steer children away from the bad stuff and into the good stuff. And those protocols, it will give you an awareness of how youngsters are using AI and how you need to adapt for that. And it would allow us as the professional body to feed back to like exam boards and things like that and say, actually, we need to change how we're doing assessment because this is how children are operating now, and look at fundamentally remodeling that whole process of assessment and so on. But we need to go on that journey with the children because they're the ones that are using it. So I have anxiety about AI being used in the system that we have, but my anxiety is about the system rather than AI. I'm kind of almost resolved to the fact that that horse is now bolted and there is nothing we can do about it, and trying to hold that back is like Canute trying to hold back the tide. We can't do it, so let's just try and work with what we've got. You know, when God gives you lemons, make lemonade sort of idea, whether you agree with it philosophically or not. I think we need to find a way around working with AI for the sake of children, because they will be using it in the workplace, and it's those that are equipped to deal with it that will get the jobs, that will find their way in society. And if we hold them back, it's just not going to work.
For sure. And I do think, you know, part of the reason why schools are beautiful, wonderful places that we do try to make it equal for all. And so making sure that we are using this in the classroom, we are helping students to identify what's true, what's not true, what's, you know, completely made up by AI, complete made upness, because that still happens. We like to think that we've gone beyond that because it's still learning. There is stuff, definite stuff that is coming through AI that's not true.
And on that point, just let me go on record for anyone that's listening. I do recognize that students still need to know stuff and learn stuff. But I think there's ways to use AI to help support that rather than it necessarily replacing that process of learning. That's a different debate, much longer podcast. We don't have time for that now, but I'm just putting that on record so that we don't get any complaints.
Beautiful. But I agree. I think there is some anxiety as to how it can work in the system, and that's something that's going to need to evolve. We're going to need to look at it. Yeah,
I also think the idea of having a chap with grey hair making decisions about the policy around AI for youngsters is frankly a little bit absurd, and that's not to denigrate Sir Ian Bockham's expertise. It's just that he's lived in a different world to the one that the children that we teach are going to live in.
For sure.
Okay, time is ticking by, so I'm going to go straight to your article about novels, because this is your thing, and we'll skip straight to that if that's okay.
Sounds good. So this is from The Guardian, but the US Guardian, because I'm trying to branch out a little bit and get away from not get away from the UK news, but make sure that we're including all of, you know, some more of our Anglophone listeners.
I never even realized there was a US Guardian.
To be honest, I was.
It can't be for much longer. It's bound to get banned soon.
Well, Well, no, I mean, probably. So we should feature it while we can. So this is talking about the use of books in schools, specifically in kind of middle and secondary schools, and saying something that was flagged to me last year, and I've repeated to many other educators, but I wanted to highlight again. And this is this idea that teachers are no longer setting novels and reading whole novels with their students for a number of different reasons. Some of it is because of curriculum time crunch. Quite a bit of it is because of curriculum time crunch, if I'm totally honest. And some of it is because teachers don't think that students have the capacity anymore to sustain reading an entire book. And that just makes, makes me all like squiggly.
Well, let's address that very briefly with a shameless plug. We do have the Reading for Pleasure course available with our expert, Kaylee Leisure, on just that, making reading an enjoyable pastime for youngsters and bringing all of those things to bear. Take a look at the website, korueducation.uk, if you want to see. It's a brilliant course that Kaylee's put together. But sorry, carry on, Kaylee.
No, thank you for doing that plug, because it's always awkward when I think about like plugging myself, and I'm like, actually, it's much easier if Chris does that for me. Thank you very much. So yeah, basically the whole article reviews the fact that there are now many students leaving compulsory education without having read an entire book for themselves. Terrifying, and not setting them up well for future, and not opening the door to what a rich life literature can bring. We're doing our students a disservice by not doing it. And yeah, basically,
where do you stand on audiobooks?
Fully into the audiobookness, fully in, feet first, because it's doing the same thing in our brain. I know it's not coming through our eyes, it's coming through our ears, but the imagination, the empathy, the world building that is required is the same as if you read it through your eyes. And there are lots of people who believe, well, if you don't read it and decode it yourself, then it's not real reading. But actually, that's a load of nonsense. Very clearly needed to stop myself from swearing there.
No, I'm totally with you. There's plenty of research to support the idea that the simple model of literacy is outdated and ineffective in how it analyzes literacy and so forth. So I'm quite happy to go on record with that. Sign up to the course with Kaylee and you'll get to find out all about that sort of stuff. On the audiobook point, though, taking it a step further, do kids need to read books? And can they access knowledge and information in different ways? And I ask this question without trying to cause offense. When I was teaching, I really struggled to read term time. Summer holidays were where I would knock out most of my reading for pleasure in the summer holidays, particularly because you've got that kind of extended period where you can really switch off. And I struggled with that because I was accessing so much material on a day-to-day basis. I was using books for my teaching. I was reading reports. I was doing data stuff on screens, all of that kind of stuff. And my eyes were just really tired at the end of the day. And sometimes, putting on a movie or a program was just a little bit easier on the mind at the end of the day.
For sure. Okay, I'm going to make an analogy here. I would say the same thing about exercise, right? I exercise better when I'm not full-time teaching. I exercise for longer. I do better. And it would be better for me if I exercised for 20 minutes every day. The habit would stick and I would get better benefits from it if I did it every day, even when I was tired. If I managed to find that 20 minutes of going for a walk at lunchtime, it would impact my day more. And this is similar. It does similar things to your brain.
Okay, I think that's absolutely fair. And I'm totally on board with all of that, to be honest with you, Kaylee. And I wish I had time to read all the books that I've bought. If I'm totally honest, I've decided that buying books and reading books are two separate hobbies of mine.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yes, there is the book dragon inside me, which wants to own all the books. And then there's the actual reader that wants to read the books that I have.
Yeah, for sure. So I think to maybe summarize what we've talked about today, books are good and kids should read them more.
And listen to them and do the whole thing.
And enjoy them. I think that's the thing for me, enjoy them, because I was very struck by your comment there about that rich world that exists. And whenever I have that bout of reading, like I often do in the summer, I always feel a much richer, happier person as a result, even if it's trashy literature.
Oh, trash literature has a wonderful place in the world. There's a reason why it sells more, and why we should read that too. It's not. It doesn't all have to be like highfalutin literature. I'm in for all of it.
Yeah. I think what else? Just to summarize the other bits that we've talked about: internal exclusion, tricky. Whose rights are paramount? How do you manage that? How do you make sure it's not a damaging process? We didn't actually come up with any particular answers there. We think it's probably context specific, but it is tricky. And then the whole thing about AI, that basically the whole teaching system needs to change in order to meet the needs of pupils. So if any politicians are listening to this, then perhaps they can get in touch and we can talk to them about that. Bridget Phillipson, if you're around, love to hear from you. If you don't want to get in touch with us, just read a bit of Ken Robinson. That would be great.
Hey, that's a good summary, Chris. Sounds good.
Well, listen, Kaylee, again, always a pleasure. Great to be back on board with you. And yeah, thanks so much for today.
No worries. Have a great one.
You too. Bye now.
Bye.